My sister wanted a DNA test to prove I lied €1. She wasn't ready for what it proved about her. She didn't wait for me to sit down before she put the envelope on the table. We were still standing in my mother's kitchen, coats half off, and Denise slid it across the counter like she'd been holding it under her arm the whole drive over. "Read it, Emma. Read it in front of everyone so nobody can say I made it up." My husband Marcus was still in the doorway with the diaper bag in his hand. My daughter Ruby was 4 years old and asleep on his shoulder, her red hair catching the kitchen light, the same red hair that had started this whole thing 8 months earlier. My sister was smiling the way people smile when they've already decided they've won. She had no idea that the paper in that envelope was going to end her marriage before it ended mine. My name is Emma Sorensen. I'm 32 years old, and if you've ever had someone in your own family try to hand you a truth as a weapon, only to have it turn around in their hands, comment same below, because I need to know how many of us there are. But to understand what happened in that kitchen, you have to go back almost a year, to a town on the Oregon coast where everybody's father either fishes or used to. Bandon, Oregon is the kind of place where the fog doesn't lift until 11 in the morning most days and everyone still remembers who your grandmother was. My father ran a boat out of the harbor for 26 years before his hip gave out. My mother taught 2nd grade at the elementary school 2 blocks from the house I grew up in, the same house she still lives in. Denise is my older sister by 3 years, and from the time I can remember anything, she was the one people pointed to first. She was the one who got the solo in the Christmas program in 3rd grade. She was the one my father took out on the boat on Saturday mornings, because I got seasick and nobody ever offered me a second chance to prove I wouldn't. I didn't grow up angry about it. I grew up quiet about it, which is a different thing, and it took me until I was almost 30 to understand the difference. I married Marcus Kelleher 9 years ago. He's a marine biologist who studies the kelp beds off the coast, which means he spends a lot of his working life underwater and the rest of it smelling faintly of salt no matter how many times he showers. He is patient in a way I didn't know a person could be patient, and he does not raise his voice, not once in 9 years, not even the night everything came apart. Our daughter Ruby was born in March, 4 years ago, with a head of hair so red it startled the nurse who delivered her. Marcus is dark-haired, olive-skinned, half Irish and half Lebanese on his father's side. I'm a plain dishwater blonde. Neither of us has red hair anywhere close in our families, except for one person nobody talked about anymore, my great-grandmother Astrid, who came over from a fishing village outside Bergen in 1931 and who, according to the one photograph that survived her, had hair the color of a stop sign. My mother mentioned Astrid once, in passing, the week after Ruby was born, and then never brought it up again, because in my family you mention a fact exactly once, and then you're expected to let it live there undisturbed for the rest of your life. That worked for almost 4 years. It stopped working the week of my parents' anniversary party last spring, when Denise, 3 glasses of white wine into the evening, looked across the yard at Ruby chasing my father's dog around the lawn and said, loud enough for 6 people to hear her, "It's just funny, isn't it? Neither of you two has that hair anywhere." Nobody laughed. My father changed the subject to the weather, which is the Oregon coast answer to every uncomfortable silence. I thought that was the end of it. It was the beginning. Here's what I didn't know yet. Sitting on that lawn holding a paper plate of potato salad, my sister had been unhappy for a long time, in a way she had never once said out loud to me, and unhappiness that doesn't get spoken tends to go looking for somewhere else to land. Denise had been engaged twice before she married her husband Todd, and both engagements had ended within a year, and my mother always explained it the same way, that Denise simply had standards other people couldn't meet. What I learned much later was that both of those men had said some version of the same thing on their way out the door, that they couldn't be near her happiness without watching her try to renegotiate the terms of it. I didn't know that yet either. All I knew through that summer was that my sister had started calling Marcus directly. Not me. Him. About kelp, she said, because her neighbor had a saltwater tank and needed advice. The calls always ended up somewhere else. Has Ruby ever asked why she looks different? Has anyone ever run a test just for peace of mind? Wouldn't it be interesting to know for sure? Marcus never told me about those calls while they were happening. He is not a man who tells you about a fire while it's still small enough to put out with a glass of water. He just started keeping things. A folder on his laptop, named after nothing, just a string of numbers so I wouldn't stumble onto it by accident. 41 screenshots by the time it was over. He wasn't building a case against my sister. He told me afterward he was building a floor, so that whatever fell, I wouldn't be the one who had to catch it alone. If you've ever noticed someone in your family collecting quiet evidence about you without saying why, tell me in the comments, because I think more people live inside a version of this than anyone admits at Thanksgiving. In September, Denise found something on one of those ancestry websites, the kind people use to build family trees for fun. She'd sent in her own saliva sample 2 years earlier out of boredom during a slow week of summer break, back when she still taught high school biology at the same building she'd graduated from. What she got back in September wasn't about hair color, and it wasn't about Ruby at all, not directly, though that's what set her looking. She'd started poking around a paid-on service the site offered, a paternity comparison tool marketed mostly at people curious about family trees, and on a Tuesday night with a glass of wine and an idle hour, she used it to run a comparison against the cheek swab she'd taken from Ruby at Easter under the pretense of helping her brush her teeth. She never told anyone she'd done it. She didn't ask my permission, obviously, and she didn't ask Marcus's, and she certainly never asked our mother whether she wanted this door opened, because in my sister's mind, this was never about our mother. It was about me. It was about proving, once and for all and in front of witnesses, that the Golden family she'd always been handed second place and was built on something dishonest. She got the result on a Thursday afternoon in her empty classroom, the fluorescent lights buzzing over her desk, and she read the summary line without reading past it. The report used a phrase she didn't fully understand: €. Something about the shared percentage being consistent with a half relationship rather than what a full aunt would show €. And my sister, who has a biology degree and should have known better, or maybe knew exactly what she was looking at and chose the story that suited her, decided it meant one thing only. She decided it meant Ruby wasn't fully Marcus's daughter, and that I had spent 4 years lying to the only man who had ever been patient with me. She printed all 6 pages at the school's front office on a Friday morning before the first bell. She folded them into a manila envelope. She put that envelope in her tote bag under a paperback and a water bottle, and she carried it around for 11 days, waiting for the right audience, because my sister has never once in her life delivered bad news to just one person when a room full of people would do. The room she chose was my parents' kitchen, the Saturday before Thanksgiving, during what was supposed to be an ordinary dinner to plan who was bringing what. 6 of us were there. My parents, myself, Marcus with Ruby half asleep on his shoulder, Denise, and her husband Todd, who I want you to remember, because in about 10 minutes he is going to matter more than anyone in that room expected. Denise slid the envelope across the counter before we'd even taken our coats off. Read it, Emma. Read it in front of everyone so nobody can say I made it up. My mother's hands went still around the casserole dish she was carrying to the oven. My father sat down slowly in the kitchen chair he'd been standing next to, the way a man sits down when his knees have decided something before his mind has. I asked my sister the only question I had left. You think I cheated? She didn't answer me. She looked at Marcus instead, because Denise has never once in her life delivered an accusation to the person it was actually about. Marcus set Ruby down gently on the couch in the next room, came back, and picked up the envelope himself before I could. He read the first page in silence. Then he looked up at my sister and gave her one chance, the way he gives every animal and every person in his life exactly one chance before he stops offering them. Denise, before I open the rest of this, you've just told a kitchen full of people that my wife has been lying to me for 4 years. Are you sure that's the story you want to be standing inside when the rest of this page turns? She said, read it. She was so sure. She had been sure for 11 days. He read it out loud, and his voice did the thing it does when he's explaining a hard diagnosis to someone who doesn't want to hear it, calm all the way through, no rise, no fall. He read the actual percentage. He looked at my sister, who has a biology degree from Oregon State, and asked her a single question. Denise, what does a full ant share with a niece by percentage, and what does a half ant share? Her mouth opened and nothing came out, because she had spent 11 days rehearsing every version of this conversation except the one where somebody asked her to do the math out loud. A full ant and a full niece share about 25%. A half ant shares about 12.5%. This report isn't telling you anything happened to my marriage, Denise. It's telling you that you and Emma don't share both parents. My mother sat down at the table without being asked to. She put both hands flat on the wood in front of her, the way you brace yourself before a wave you've been watching come in from a long way off. My sister's face didn't fall yet. She was still doing the math in her head, still hoping there was a version where she'd read it correctly the first time and Marcus was the one who was wrong. She reached for the pages. Marcus didn't hand them to her yet. He turned to the ancestry section instead, the part my sister had never bothered to read past the summary line, because she had already decided what story she wanted the data to tell her. He read off the percentages. 41% Scandinavian. My mother's family, the fishing village outside Bergen, the Astra nobody talked about twice. That number would have made sense on my report. It made no sense at all on my sister's. My father, who has run a fishing boat for 26 years and can read a current before it breaks the surface, looked at that number and understood something before anyone said it out loud. He said one thing, quiet, almost to himself. Warren. My mother's eyes came up off the table for the first time since she'd sat down, and what was in them wasn't confusion. It was recognition, the kind that's been waiting a long time to be allowed into a room. Warren Castellan ran the hardware store 2 blocks from the harbor for 30 years before he passed in 2015. Everyone in Bandon knew Warren. He'd been best man at my parents' wedding in 1987. He'd been the person who taught my father how to run a boat engine before my father ever owned one of his own. And in the winter of 1988, while my father was 3 weeks into a long haul working a boat out of Astoria to cover a debt he never told my mother the full size of, Warren Castellan had started stopping by the house in the evenings to fix things that weren't broken, because a man doesn't keep showing up with a toolbox he doesn't need unless something else is bringing him. My mother was 24 that winter, alone in a house on a street where everyone could see every car that parked in front of it after dark, except Warren always parked around the corner. Nobody in this story has ever needed the details spelled out further than that, and I'm not going to give them to you either. What matters is what happened after. My mother decided, the way women in small fishing towns have decided for generations, that whatever had happened that winter had not happened, and that if a child came from it, that child would belong to the marriage she was standing inside of, because my father deserved that child, and because deciding otherwise would have cost her everything she had left. Denise was born in August of 1988. My father held her in the hospital with tears in his eyes that people still talk about at family gatherings 36 years later. Warren came to visit 2 days after with a card and a stuffed animal, the way any family friend might, and there's a photograph from that visit that sat on my grandmother's mantel for 2 decades. Warren standing slightly behind and to the side, his hand on the back of a chair, not quite in any of the pictures, always at the edge of the frame. I used to think that was just how camera-shy men stood. In November, in my parents' kitchen, I understood it was how a man stands when he can't make himself sit down in the middle of what he's built. My sister read page 4 of that report out loud herself, because Marcus had stopped being the one to say the hard parts out loud once she started shaking too hard to argue anymore. Parental confidence, cross-referenced against a genetic sample submitted years earlier to a regional genealogy project by a Warren R. Castellan, deceased. The word deceased landed on that kitchen table like something dropped from a height, and it didn't shatter, it just sat there, the way the worst truths always do, too heavy to make any noise at all. My sister looked at the paper in her hand, the paper she had carried around in a tote bag for 11 days, waiting for a room full of witnesses to watch her win. She had built an entire courtroom to convict me, and it turned out the only person on trial the whole time was 36 years in the past, standing at the edge of a photograph, unable to sit down. Todd, her husband, who had said maybe 4 words all evening, stood up from the table without a word and walked out onto the back porch by himself. Nobody followed him for almost 10 minutes. When Denise finally went out after him, I heard some of it through the screen door, not all of it, but enough. He told her he had married a woman who spent 11 days building a case to humiliate her own sister over a maybe, and that whatever she needed to prove by doing that, he was no longer sure he wanted to understand it badly enough to stay married to it. That's not my sentence to finish for you, and it isn't mine to say what happened between them after that night, only that Todd moved out 3 weeks later, and that by December my sister was living alone in the house they'd bought together the year before. My father stood up from the table that night the same way I imagine he stood up from very few things in his life. He didn't walk toward my mother first, and he didn't walk toward Denise. He walked around the table to me. He put his hand on my shoulder, and it was heavy, and it was shaking, just slightly. "Emma, take your family home. I need to sit with your mother." 32 years I had been the second name in every sentence that got said in that house. That night, for the first time, my father said my name and didn't follow it with anyone else's. I picked Ruby up off the couch. She stirred once and put her arms around my neck without waking all the way. Marcus carried the diaper bag. We drove home along the coast highway in the dark, the fog already rolling in low over the dune grass, and neither of us said anything for the first 10 minutes, because some nights don't have room for words yet. If you've stayed with me this far, comment witnessed and your state below, because I want to know how many of you are sitting on your own version of a kitchen table like that one, waiting for the right night to set it down. What happened after wasn't quick and it wasn't clean. My mother and father are still married. They sat in that kitchen together most nights that whole winter, and said maybe 10 sentences a day to each other, which is its own kind of marriage, the kind that survives by refusing to leave, not by having anything solved. My mother writes me a letter every other week now, on the same yellow legal pad she's used my whole life. She doesn't ask me to forgive her. She tells me what she planted in the garden and whether it rained, and that she and my father sat on the porch on Sunday and didn't talk much but sat there together anyway. I've answered 2 of them so far. I'm not in a hurry, and for the first time in my life, I don't feel guilty about not being in a hurry. My sister moved to Portland in January, into an apartment she found through a coworker, and she has not spoken to me since that night in the kitchen. She sent Ruby a birthday card in March with no return address, and inside it, in her neat teacher's handwriting, she wrote 4 lines that said she didn't know yet how to be someone other than the person she'd built herself to be for 36 years, and that she'd let us know when she figured it out. I keep the card in the drawer with Ruby's other keepsakes. I haven't decided yet what I'll tell my daughter about any of this, or when, but I know it won't be today, and it won't be a lie, and those are the only 2 things I've been sure of since November. My father drives out to our place every Sunday now. He sits on the back deck with Marcus and a thermos of coffee and watches Ruby chase the neighbor's dog across the yard, the same way Denise and my father used to chase each other across a different yard 30 years ago, before any of us knew what was underneath any of it. Nobody in that yard has red hair but Ruby, and not one of us has ever needed her to explain it again. My sister spent almost $200 and 11 days trying to prove I wasn't who my family thought I was. She was right that somebody in that kitchen wasn't who they'd always been told they were. She just spent 36 years assuming it could never be her. I don't tell this story for revenge, and I'm not interested in being cruel about a woman who is, tonight, probably sitting alone in an apartment in Portland trying to figure out who she is without an audience for the first time in her life. I tell it because I spent most of my 32 years believing I owed my family an explanation for being the quiet one, the second one, the one nobody drove out to the boat with on Saturday mornings. It turns out I never owed anyone that explanation at all. It turns out the truth doesn't care who's been carrying it or how long they've been carrying it for. It only cares who's still standing in the room when it finally gets set down. My name is Emma Sorensen. I'm 32 years old, and I'm done apologizing for a hair color I never asked for and a sister who needed me to be the lie so she wouldn't have to look at her own.